Good evening, you're watching The Summit Investor. I'm Bruce Whitfield. The rising cost of living these days is enough to make your eyes water. Are South Africans still able to retire at all? It's a depressing thought, but it's a real one we have to consider. Koos is Chief Executive of P3 Investment Group, and Nico Louis-Mini is the Head of Investments at Customer Value at Liberty Life, the world's longest job description. They join me for this discussion this evening. Because when you look at it, I mean, you've written a great piece in which you describe the corrosive, I don't want to say erosive, it's like acid being poured on your hands, for example, and you'll just watch your hands dissolve in front of you. Tell me about the corrosive power of inflation.
You know, it's a very important thing that people need to understand. Yeah, about 2 years ago, we drew a quote from an insurance company to say, you know, if I invest 2,000 Rand a month for 40 years with a 5% escalation in fees, how much will this money be worth after 40 years? And the answer we got was 22 million. Now, if you tell a young person these days that you're going to have 22 million when you retire, he's going to be very chuffed with himself, and he's going to say, at least I'll be rich when I retire. So we did a bit of calculations with that, and we found out that with an 8% inflation rate on average, that 22 million will be worth only 850,000 in today's time value of money. And that's quite a shocker, because nobody can retire on 850,000 Rand today. It's just impossible.
Nico, when you look at it, I mean, that corrosive power, it's explaining, it's taking it the other way around, turning the numbers on their head and saying, in today's money, this is what your life savings are going to be worth. And it's depressing for most people.
Absolutely, yes. Another statistic that I've seen recently is if you invested, or if you put 1 Rand under your mattress in the late 70s, early 80s, it would be worth less than 5 cents today. And that's the corrosive power of this inflation that you're talking about. It's phenomenal, but I mean, it's devastating if you're on the wrong side of it. Absolutely.
Okay, if you put a Rand under your pillow in the 1980s, and it was one of the old 1960s,
it's probably a collector's item. Ignoring that fact,
it has an ounce of pure silver in it, and silver's at $29 an ounce. Don't ever negate.
So the monetary value of the money is worth less than the nickel that it's, or the silver that it's printed on. Yeah.
Completely, absolutely. But when one looks at it, how does one then overcome it? Because here we've got a hell of a problem. I want to save 2,000 Rand of my hard-earned cash now. I struggle to do that. I'm doing the right thing. Are you telling me I'm going to be punished for it?
Well, I don't think you're going to be punished. I think that one must make it clear that it's better to save something instead of saving nothing. So people must not stop saving because their money is not going to be worth that much. What they need to realize is maybe they have to start looking at alternative ways of making provision for retirement. And that is where P3 Investment Group shows people that maybe buying a couple of properties throughout your working career is the answer, because properties will obviously grow in value, and it will give you an inflation-linked income for life after retirement if those properties have been paid for.
And property, I mean, people scoff at property investments, but you look at some of the wealthiest people in the world, Nico, and they are property investors.
Property magnates. Yeah.
Exactly. So we should be ignoring the insurance companies and doing what he recommends.
Well, I mean, you could argue both ways. I mean,
I like his argument. You can argue his way.
I mean, you could always argue the diversification arguments, and I mean, I'm a firm believer of that. So investing in a diversified sort of portfolio. I mean, when the property markets tank, you've got other asset classes that pick up that performance.
When property markets tank, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you right there, Nico. When property markets tank, do rentals tank? Because if you've got an asset for which you've paid, you're getting income on that. You don't really care what happens to the underlying asset until you want to exercise that value, surely.
That's correct. And if you don't want to sell because you keep this property as a cash cow, you probably never sell it. So the real returns on property is not the capital growth, which we know will take place over time, but the actual rental income that keeps up with inflation, no matter how old you become.
Argue that one. What happens when markets tank? Dividends tank. So your income tanks.
Yeah, it's true, Bruce. I mean, I can't argue that dividends won't tank, but I mean, it's most unlikely that dividends are going to halve. So you're sitting with the dividend yield currently at 3 to 4%. I mean, half that you get to 2%. The problem with property investments is you've got a high maintenance costs. Granted, if you've got a bond, you can sort of offset against the running expenses or the interest on the bond, but still very few people factor in the running costs for property. I mean, tenants tend to be destructive in properties. By the very nature, I mean, it's not their own property, so it's, I mean, break the cupboard door, it's not really a big issue. So people tend to forget about fixing the geyser, fixing the cupboards, and that all needs to be factored into the return at the end of the day.
And critics of property also talk about the acquisition cost of property. When you look at buying a property, there's the mortgage cost, of course, especially if you're using debt to buy the property, there's a considerable cost there. But even things like transfer costs, I mean, 8% or something ludicrous on that cost. I mean, that's got to be surely.
Yeah, but you must understand property properties under 600,000, they've actually been exempted from transfer costs. So if one buys a property off plan, there's no costs involved. Costs are often included in the price. And just to come back to what my colleague says, you know, that's the argument people always say about the managing costs of property. But tell me, which other asset class will another person pay about 60,000 Rand a year towards your asset? And if he skips 1 or 2 payments during that year, you still get about 50,000 Rand or whatever during that year that somebody else is paying off towards your asset. So one must have a look at the broader picture when it comes to property investment. Just don't get stuck with the idea that tenants are going to cause you trouble. The same argument is valid when one thinks about starting a business. You know, the employees are going to give you trouble, and you know that. But why do you still start a business? Because you're going to make a lot of money. And if you have the right systems and procedures in place, you can manage your employees. In the same way, if you manage your tenants correctly, you can really minimize your risks.
I mean, property, is it a great inflation hedge or not?
In the long term, I'd say yes, as a rule of thumb. But I mean, don't put all your eggs in one basket. The problem with property is very few people have 600, 700, 800,000 lying around to put into a property investment. So either have to take out a bond, or you have to invest 1,000, 2,000 Rand a month. You can't buy a house for 2,000 Rand a month. It's next to impossible if it's 600,000, 700,000 Rand worth. So I mean, you need these other asset classes that allow you to invest in smaller portions on a regular basis in order to build up that value to get to the point where you can purchase larger assets.
There was an old journalist who once said, "Don't buy the products of the insurance companies, buy their shares." Is that too cynical?
I wouldn't say so, Bruce, no. Most definitely not. I mean, insurance products today are linked products. They're vastly different to the products 10, 15 years ago. I mean, they're very transparent, and you can directly compare them to products offered by asset managers. So by no stretch of the imagination would I say rather buy the share of the life insurance company than actually buying the underlying products. They come with many benefits, and if you actually hold them for the long term, they are a cheap alternative to asset manager backed unit trust products.
Of course, Nico is making a brave fight for the insurance sector, as we expect him to do. But when you look at the diversification argument, I mean, are you big on diversification?
Well, yes, I have properties in Cape Town, some in Durban, some in Gauteng. You know, that's what I call diversification. Because why should you have a lousy performing asset class where you can have an asset class where other people's actually paying for it? And that's the bottom line of property. People don't realize that you use the bank's money to invest. You don't have to use your after-tax money to invest, and you get somebody else to pay off your bond for you. And if you reinvest the profits that you make from the rental income, you can pay a property off in 10 to 11 years. So it's actually unfair to compare the two products because the one just doesn't stand a chance. The one is more a business. Like a property investment is more like a part-time business where you've got you loan money and you get people to work for you. Whereas passive investment, like my colleague here, there's nothing wrong with that if you really don't have a time or you don't want to make an effort of managing your properties. Managing a property portfolio is a bit of an effort, a couple of hours a month. And some people don't want to do that. Well, that's up to them, but we'll look at the results at the end of the 40 years when they start to retire. The one person's money is going to run out and the other person's going to have an inflation-linked income which doesn't die with him. His children will benefit from that once he passes away as well.
Well, it's a fascinating discussion. It is one of those that there is never an end to that discussion because the opinions are so diverse. My thanks to my guests, Koos Toit from P3 Investment Group and Nico Louis Mini from Liberty Life. That's all we have time for this evening from me and the team here at Summit. Good night.